Final Fantasy XIV, not unlike other MMOs, can be a confusing visual mess, and half of the mechanical interactions in the game seem to just work. While the Hall of the Novice does exist, it doesn't always do the best job at teaching players how the game actually functions, especially when it comes to raiding. I'm a relatively new raider myself, and as someone who has only recently become fluent in raider brainrot, I knew I had to create a guide with enough information in it that even the most casual Limsy Cat Girl toe sucker could understand. That's why I'm presenting a quickfire guide to Final Fantasy XIV. The topics for today are knockbacks and knockback immunities. Alright, get ready to sit down and listen because every job in Final Fantasy XIV has a knockback. I mean hell, Warrior and Blue Mage get two. There is a very simple rule to knockbacks in this game, and that's that if it's purple or red, you probably can't knockback immune it. There are of course exceptions to this rule because this game makes no sense sometimes, but I digress. There are two role actions you can get depending on what job you are playing, and thankfully since they aren't locked to classes, they will be available at all levels. For casters, meaning healers and magical range DPS with the inclusion of Blue Mage, they unlock Surecast at level 44, which is 43 levels too late if you ask me, because this action is really damn helpful. Surecast is an off-global cooldown with a 2-minute recast that lasts 6 seconds and can be used to prevent the player being knocked back or to prevent being sucked by enemy attacks or environmental hazards. It also prevents being dragged to another player if they use the rescue action, and it prevents your cast from being interrupted by taking damage. So it's really useful if you want to keep casting Fire 4 uninterrupted in your ley line while your healer cries about having to heal through your cheese puff. Like, come on, it's a really complicated rotation. For melees, physical range DPS, and tanks, they unlock Arm's Length at level 32, which again should really just be unlocked at level 1. This action functions much the same as Surecast, sporting the same 2-minute recast time, and the ability to nullify the aforementioned knockback and suck for the same 6-second window. Additionally, it also has the ability to apply 15-second slow to any enemy that hits you with a physical attack. This means that enemies that don't do physical attacks are unaffected by this property. This slow is a 20% reduction to the auto attack speed and global recast time, which can be a very handy tool to tanks and DPS both. Most bosses are immune to this effect, so in dungeons it is a good idea to use this ability while pulling a large amount of enemies. A worthwhile use of it on melee and physical range DPS is in Deep Dungeon Solo, but because of your sometimes wet napkin-like physique, any reduction to an enemy's damage is helpful. Now let's talk about Warrior. On Warrior, if you activate Vengeance or the upgraded Damnation at the same time as Arm's Length, you might find that enemies are unaffected by the slow. This is because the effects are considered counters. Both Vengeance and Damnation have a higher priority than Arm's Length. As far as I know, this is the only instance where a counter overlaps with Arm's Length, though if there is another, feel free to let me know in the comments. Another neat fact about Warrior is that its main 1-minute ability is a knockback immune in and of itself. Inner Strength, which you get from activating the Inner Release ability, acts as a knockback immunity and lasts for 15 seconds. Strangely, this isn't the goofiest tank interaction, as Paladin's cover can cause you to take another player's knockback. When you cover another player and they take damage that would normally trigger a knockback effect, the Paladin will instead take the knockback. This seems to happen randomly across mechanics, as some of them apply the knockback through damage and some of them don't. Another interesting thing to note is that if an enemy attacks someone a Paladin is covering and the Paladin has Arm's Length up, the enemy will be affected with slow. There are also some knockbacks that you can avoid if you have a big enough shield, as they only trigger when health is lost due to damage from the knockback. Field operations have their own anti-knockback abilities, like Lost Mana Wall and Bosja and Rage and Occult Crescent. Mana Wall is a 90% damage reduction for 6 seconds on top of this, however it also applies heavy to the player. Rage, on the other hand, is a 10-second anti-knockback that also has some irrelevant damage effects because I'm too lazy to explain them. It is worth noting that in this recording, there is no knockback. I couldn't seem to get a fight with a knockback in it, so I'm instead showing how it also ignores the forced march. Now, let's move on to the 6 types of knockback in Final Fantasy XIV. I ripped most of the names of these from the wiki because I'm not really reinventing the wheel here. Firstly, we have Directional Knockbacks. These attacks are usually telegraphed by arrows on the ground, and you are not always able to prevent the knockback using immunity. There are a few different variants, including one that causes constant pushback. A good example of a directional knockback is the one in between phases of Valagamanda Extreme, which can be prevented by using anti-knockback. Next, we have line knockbacks. These are dark red lines with a bidirectional knockback on either side. Usually the line in the middle will do lethal damage. A good example of a line knockback is in Eden's Verse Fulmination, otherwise known as E5. The line knockback is featured in both normal mode and savage. Oftentimes a knockback immunity can be used to prevent getting knocked back by these, however the ones in E5 cannot be prevented as they lock the player into an animation. Thirdly, we have Epicentral Knockbacks, which push the player back from a large central AoE. Standing inside the AoE will often deal lethal damage, and oftentimes mechanics require you to stand directly outside of the AoE. This is the easiest knockback to figure out whether or not you need to use knockback immunity. A blue AoE means you can use knockback, and a purple AoE or sometimes even a red one means you can't. Fourth, we have targeted knockbacks that stick to the player in either the form of a marker above their head or a debuff. These are included in a few fights, including the Interfos, Shantoto from Windurst, the Third Walk, and AAC Heavyweight M4, otherwise known as Everything Birds. These can rarely be knockback cancelled as well, though it is usually safe to assume they can't be if it's your first time doing the content. Fifth, we have what I would consider to be the classic Final Fantasy XIV knockback, a Radial Knockback. These knockbacks push the player out from a central point. They are featured in a lot of different pieces of content across every form of play, except for fishing. Well, for now at least. Please have a cold. We're all waiting for a fishing extreme. Though I'm kind of allergic to fish, so that would be one hell of a doom mechanic. Like the Epicentral Knockbacks, whether or not you can immunity it is dependent on the colour. A blue or orange knockback means you can use immunity, whereas a purple or red knockback means you cannot. Finally, we have player actions that cause knockback effects. The only ones remaining in the game are blue mage actions. I will get back to blue mage in a moment. As a quick aside, there is another knockback in the game called a knock-up that I did not realize was a thing until recently. It is an attack that knocks players upwards and cannot be prevented by anti-knockback. It was featured most recently in the fight AAC Heavyweight M3, otherwise known as M11 or Tyrant, in both the normal and savage modes. I would not consider this a true knockback, since it functions very differently to other ones and it allows very little player interaction because you cannot move whilst you are in the air. A variant of the knock-up style of mechanic is called the Uppercut, which I think we first saw in AAC Light Heavyweight M1 Black Cat. We recently saw it again with Preesh in Juno The First Walk, where she goes Auroral Uppercut. Now I'm going to switch to talking about Blue Mage, because they have a few very interesting interactions as a limited job. This includes the ability to put the damage they take onto someone else with a veil, which can cause them to take the knockback instead if it's a targeted knockback. They also have access to Diamond Back, which is a 90% damage reduction with anti-knockback for 10 seconds. Whilst you have this active, you are entirely unable to move. However, if you get knocked back by something that can't be knockback immune while this is active, it will cancel Diamond Back. Luckily, the damage you take before getting knocked back is still mitigated. There are also the actions Malediction of Water and Right Round. Malediction of Water is a 15 yarm line in front of you that causes players and enemies alike to be knocked back 10 yarms. And Right Round is your very own radial knockback centered on yourself, which knocks all enemies and players within 8 yarms back 10 yarms. There are quite a few bosses that are immune to this effect, and other players would be able to knockback immune both of these. Players are also immune to it if they are not currently in combat. Thank goodness for that, or people would push each other all over Limsa. Now there is one last thing, and this is quite important. There are quite a few dashes in Final Fantasy XIV, and a lot of them can be used to knockback cancel. Knockback cancelling is unique in that it can be used in any situation where you would normally be knocked back, so long as you still have the ability to execute actions. Most gap closes, including any that move you forwards when used correctly and timed exactly as you are being knocked back, can prevent you from moving backwards. In the same vein, if you are brave enough to dash forward while getting pulled towards the boss, it can also cancel the draw in. There are plenty of uses for this, so it's not a bad idea to learn this skill. Anyway, that's about it for knockbacks. If you like this style of video and want to see more of it, let me know in the comments, as I've had a lot of fun writing this. And please let me know if there are any game mechanics you would like me to do a deep dive into next.